discussing race in America at this time right now. So for those who don't know me, my name is Dominique Goodmond, and I am the founder of Correctional Views. It's just an organization built off exposing the truth surrounding American justice, the American justice system, and the mistreatment that individuals receive in the prison system. So it is built and structured, like its name says, to correct the views of people and what they have in their head, their headspace of what actually happens. But during this time, especially after George Floyd, there had to be a lot of discussion on where everyone's headspace is exactly right now, the thoughts that Blacks in America are holding, the thoughts that whites in America are holding. And we wanted to create a space where there's like a basis of understanding. And today we are actually surrounding the topic of education in America. So that is what our panelists consist of today, are individuals that are teaching and working in an administration of the education system in America. And so we're going to allow everyone the opportunity to go ahead and introduce themselves to everyone on the webinar today. We can go ahead and start with Ashleigh.
Good morning, everyone. I am Ashleigh Gibson. I'm the Director of Multi-Tiered Systems of Support and Coaching for Johnston County Public Schools. A big focus is working with the instructional coaches to support schools in providing high-quality core and resources for supplemental support for special or advanced in their learning. Can you hear me okay? Can you guys hear me all right? This is my internet connection was unstable for a second. A big part of our work is also looking at database problem solving and dissecting when we see that a specific group of students is underperforming. Why is that? Is it a result of our core? Is it the way that we're intervening with those students? And we have to be willing to look at all of those as possibilities, because if we don't, then otherwise we are saying that it is a result of race and culture and genes, and that is not okay. So that is just the focus of our work. And I'm glad to be here today. Thank you.
My name is Dominique Manson. I serve as an assistant principal in Johnston County Schools. Just every day and every I try to make the work of equity and trying to reach all kids every day. There's no day that I wake up that children are not the forefront of my mind. It is exciting to be a principal, work to be an assistant principal in Johnston County Schools. And we have a lot of work to do. I would say that. We continue that as we continue talking.
Good is it afternoon? Good morning, everyone. Trey Christopher here. I am the founding principal of a public charter school for public policy in Washington, D.C. Prior to that, was an administrator for a couple of years in New York City in the public charter schools sector in New York City, doing some awesome work. Far from, the mecca of what, education should be, but we're, on the way. And so like, I'm really grateful in being a part of the work and being a part of this conversation so we can help push to make schools a place where all students thrive, where the opportunity gap is closed. And so that we are ensuring that our Black and brown and white kids are doing what they should be doing in order to be productive citizens in society. And that's by equaling and leveling the playing field so that everyone has equitable access to what they need.
Hey everyone, I'm Amanda Allen and I serve as the Executive Director of Social and Emotional Learning for Johnston County Public Schools. And in that position, I get to work with all of our mental health support personnel. I also get to work with NC State University with our counseling department. My background is counseling and my focus is very much on trauma-informed practices and working through implicit bias and trying to figure out how we can best serve the needs of a population. And my mindset, whereas we do have, my mindset is the majority of the population wants to do better, but there are a lot of misconceptions and cognitive distortions that get in the way. And my my want for the world is to figure out how to get through those and push people out of some comfort areas to really expose them to the work, because we cannot continue to marginalize populations just because of biases and systemic racism. So that's where I'm at.
Hi, everybody. My name is Barrett Rosser. I'm a New York native here in Philadelphia. I am a current student to University of Pennsylvania, doctoral student in reading, writing, and literacy, educator of over 10 years, a teacher, humanities coach, educational consultant. And I'm really interested in thinking about how educators can use inquiry groups to help them think about how students can use literacy as empowerment to walk away from texts and writing experiences with a critical consciousness. And given today's topic of racism and systemic racism and white supremacist culture, I'm very interested in learning more about how educators can thrive within and against these systems, and what does it mean to work beyond them in a healthy way, especially for educators of color.
Good morning, I'm Hannah Smith. I am the Executive Director of School Support in Johnston County Schools. I also worked in Wake County Schools for 7 years. I am really excited about the opportunity to be here today. As a part of my role, I work really closely with Ashleigh, and so echoing her, digging into the data that we have, nationally, we really over-identify our Black and Brown students for special education and under-identify them for gifted education. And so looking at the belief systems that we have in our teachers and our educators, but also just the beliefs that are within the system and the structures within our school system that even allows for and sets that up to happen. And so historically, that's just how our schools were created. And so how do we break down those barriers to ensure, as Trey said, that all of our students have access to high quality, equitable access to high quality instruction academically and socio-emotionally. So I'm excited to be here today.
Okay, so once again, thank you all for joining the panel today and having this discussion just regarding the systematic structure of racism right now inside of the education system. So a lot of individuals at this point are speaking to a lot of people saying, hey, you need to educate yourself on this. You need to educate yourself on that. Learn the history of our culture. However, ultimately, Black and white, included, don't know like the history of a lot of things in this nation, simply because of, just the lack of promoting any of this, information within the school system. A lot of people are not aware of Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896. So that's where they're actually legalizing segregation, but they're making the statement as long as everything is equal treatment, it's okay when you have Black and white separate in other nations. So that's when you have, your Black only, restrooms, Blacks can only eat here. Blacks have their own schools and whites go to school here, until you run against Brown versus Board of Education. And that just goes to highlight how recent all of this is, because that was in 1954, where you're actually, voting to have the schools actually come together and allow Black kids come to school with white kids under the same roof. But still to this day, even though, it's been legalized in 1954, like I just think about it, like my mom was born in, she's going to be mad I'm telling her age. My mom was born in like 1956. So that's not that long ago. Like, this is not like 200 years ago. So, just realizing that it was that recent to where you were allowed to integrate, Blacks and white within the school system. Like, you guys just kind of join in the conversation. What is kind of some of the systematic oppressions that you're dealing with working in the systems that you're working in right now?
Well, Dominique, before we get really heavy into that, to the point that you're making, I was reading up on the court cases over the weekend. And okay, so we had all that happen with Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, but we didn't have anything actually taking place at all schools through 1960, to the point that we had other court cases come about. Like, school systems continued to hold on to that, well, if we're talking about systemic approaches to racism, waiting longer to desegregate their schools. They weren't jumping on board, and I'm sure that they had a myriad of excuses about why it was taking them longer than others. So I just wanted to add that context, because I was surprised to realize that over the weekend.
Okay, and still, like, even with acknowledging that, so we're saying, like, kind of like the emancipation of slaves, you know, slaves were, you know, set free on June 19th, and, you know, you're not allowed to have it. However, that's not the official date that, you know, slaves were actually freed. It takes, you know, an approach of actually people implementing, you know, that new, you know, law into order. So we are allowing segregation we're allowing desegregation in 1954, and, you know, this structure is going in till this day. There is still systematic oppression in the school systems. How are you guys dealing with that, and what kind of tactics are being put in front of you within your positions?
So I would say that when we look at the fact that I said a while ago, we're over-identifying Black and brown males for special education systemically. And so when you go back to the fact, even whenever we had our segregated schools, we societally were scared of the fact for African Americans to become literate. We did not want them. Well, I say we, like society, white people did not want Black people to become literate. So either white people would have to pay money whenever they got caught teaching Black people how to read, right? So when you look all the way back to that, then whenever we were allowed to have schools, you had white schools and Black schools, they were funded differently. They were funded so much less. Our Black schools got much less funding. Fast forward to now, it's the same thing. Like, you look at a socioeconomic problem that we have funding issues in our schools. So that still happens today. So then you look at, if we are over-identifying certain populations, they are getting different educations because they do not have equitable access to the same instruction, because perhaps it is not a disability. Perhaps they did not get they did not get the right high quality access. Therefore, they didn't get the right interventions. We just had the wrong belief system about that student because we saw the color of their skin, or we saw the neighborhood in which they came from, and therefore we dismissed them and did not believe they could achieve. And so then we just placed them, we put a label on them, we have predictability about them, and just toss them to the side because systemically, historically, that's what's happened. And so we just continue to do that as a system, and you just trace that back. That's what's continuing to happen. And so what we are doing when we say data-based problem solving is we're bringing all that to light. We're saying, okay, let's look at the fact that we should have, percentage-wise, we should have X percent special education students, period. If we're over-identifying special ed in general, why is that? Now let's break it down into our demographic groups. Okay, why do we have this gap between our white students and our African American students? Let's break that down. And we're having conversations with our teachers, with our schools about why is there this gap between these demographic groups. Okay, now let's look at how are we, and we break down to the instructional domains. What does the instruction look like for these students? What is the curriculum being taught for these students? What does the environment look like for these students? So having the digging deep into those conversations, but those conversations are just now happening when all of this has been happening for hundreds of years.
And I can agree with you on that. I did a study with the North Carolina State, and we were able to go around to different schools in Johnson County, Edgecombe, and Wake County. And we were able to take deep data dives and look at the data about students who were passing, who were meeting expectations and growth. And we visited one particular elementary school in Johnson County, and we were looking at the growth charts. And when I saw the growth chart, it showed that, what subgroups met and exceeded growth. And so we had the white subgroup, they met and exceeded growth. We had the special population, they met and exceeded growth. We had ESL students, they met and exceeded growth. We even had our OCS, and they had the low incident students. Every subgroup met growth except for African American students. And my mind just starts wondering, how can someone who can't even speak English, exceed growth versus a kid who spoke English his whole life? Like, how is that happening? And so when we ask, what's the differentiation within your lessons for our students? Are we meeting needs? And the principal says, we teach all our students the same way. And so that's the main problem, because all kids don't.
That's the problem.
And we need differentiation and structure within our curriculum, because if we don't, Johnny's not going to learn the same as Jocelyn, and Esmeralda's not going to know the same as Sarah. Like, we have to be able to learn how to identify students and break up the learning curve to help them get to that place, versus saying, hey, this is what we did for everyone, so it's equitable. No, it's not. You know, it just goes with the equity and equality. You know, how many boxes do you need to look over the fence versus, you know, is this person tall, is this person short? Let's just remove the whole fence. You know, let's just go ahead and attack each problem with each kid. And it takes more work, trust me. And teachers, sometimes it's a lot on teachers, and especially in the elementary world, where it's, you know, kids are going crazy. You're trying to identify, and working elementary and working high school, I'm not gonna lie, I was blessed to get back in high school, because elementary, it is tough. It is very tough. Between guided reading and dibbles and trying to do all the class dojo, it's a lot. But I will say though, a lot of times what I did see is that in elementary school, that the teachers that couldn't reach those bad kids or those high energy kids, they left them to the side. And we can't teach them. We've given everyone the same curriculum. And it's like, well, what do we do to engage them? And so I went to the Ryan Clark Academy. Amazing experience. I mean, these teachers, like, they're not letting anyone not get it. I mean, they're engaging kids to one. We had a story with one guy, a student came to school every day, did no homework. All he did was draw Power Rangers. So the teacher couldn't get that kid to do any work. So what did that teacher? That teacher came back the next day dressed up as a green Power Ranger. And then next thing you know, his student turned into an A student. Just because of that, the thought of how can I engage this kid? I make myself look silly for a minute or two, and now I have this kid under my wing. And so it's like, you know, what can we do? Are we willing to make ourselves look silly? Are we willing to take the extra mile? Are we willing to say, hey, I'm gonna stay up a little bit later to get this lesson plan ready for Josh? Like, and it really holds into the teaching, and that counts to administration accountability. There's data, but there's also deep data dials. You know, just because you see this, that doesn't mean that's what it says. So, my take.
I had a question for you, Hannah. Well, Dominique, I appreciate that. Dominique Manson, I appreciate that. I think that there's something to say about data, right? And so, like, that is the starting point. But what are we putting in place to create culturally responsive pedagogy for teachers so that we don't have this issue, right? And so, like, to Mr. Manson's point, like, every child learns differently, and we know that we cannot give students the same thing because they won't digest it in the same way. So what are we doing? Or, like, what is Johnson County? I'm very interested. Like, what are you guys doing beyond just looking at the data? Like, what are concrete next steps so that we are not disproportionately having higher African-American students in special education, right? What does that look like?
That's a great question. So one thing we're diving into is what are the instructional practices, research-based instructional practices that, or evidence-based, like what evidence do we have that these are successful? I can tell you that I know Wake County adopted their ELA curriculum, has like the text they read has like social justice in the text that it is more, that allows for relatability for students in the text that they read. So I know that they have had really great dialogue in their conversations in Wake around that because of the curriculum itself that they adopted for language arts. That is some of the conversations that we're still having in Johnston County, and Amanda and Ashleigh, feel free to jump in, and Dominique, feel free to jump in on any of that, y'all's perspective with that. Whatever, you know, what y'all want to.
Well, I just want to pull it out because someone just wanted to speak to all the panelists. They said, furthermore, we use incredibly biased standardized evaluations to measure students' cognitive abilities and IQ. Historically, many of these measures were developed by white researchers, standardized on populations that are not racially and linguistically diverse. The very nature of education and special education is rooted in institutional racism and whitewashing of how humans should learn. So that is addressed to all the panelists. Does anyone have to say anything towards that statement?
I can speak to that. I think now with everything happening in the world, like everybody's responding to this overt white supremacy, explicit, you know, and I've been privy to or trying to help others in educational spaces have these equity lenses on to see the more socially acceptable, covert white supremacy that's showing up in classrooms and schools all the time. I think that there are, you know, there's qualities of white dominant culture or supremacist culture that I keep close to me to check myself, to make sure or think about how white supremacy is working on me, even as a person of color. I think to Trevon's question, I don't know if I pronounced that right.
You can call me Trey.
Trey. To Trey's question, like these, it's ongoing conversations, right? We've done work where we put these culturally responsive books in front of teachers and students, and they know what to do with it. Like I mentioned earlier, we made a push to move the canon out, right? Some of these structures and systems revolve around curriculum resources, what actually kids and teachers are allowed to engage students with. And so it was so disheartening to know that I had a hand in getting fences in the curriculum and other works by people of color and marginalized folks, and our students of color were walking away with such a horrible experience. Like, you know, this pity view, this internalized oppression. And so I'm really interested in like what do teachers and what do educators need to do for themselves to make sure that it translates correctly, because having the books in the space is a great first step. And I've seen it go really left, right? So it's always a constant working on ourselves. These systems and structures are upheld by us, by our mindsets, and informed a lot around anti-Blackness, right? The Black body is less intelligent. The Black body is dirty. And even people of color can internalize these ideas. And I think it's a constant conversation around how our systems and structures are uplifting or perpetuating systemic racism and white dominant culture. Like I accept and expect non-closure, right? We are not gonna end this and solve racism today. It's still gonna happen as soon as we end this call, but it's always like a seed planting of the seed, never ending. And I'm glad, sad, but glad that all of these events have kind of lifted our collective consciousness and allowing folks who would never have these conversations to feel more comfortable about it.
And so before anyone responds to her, because we have a question in the chat as well that kind of correlates with the question that she's asking right now, I just do want to highlight and elevate the knowledge that people need to, you know, carry with the perception of white being power and greatness. Because it has been perceived, and some of the panelists have heard me speak on this before, it is perceived to be a compliment when you tell a Black person that they act white, or you're the whitest Black person I ever know. Like, what does that really mean? And if you're saying it just due to the fact that I articulate my words, or I'm educated, or things of that nature, why can I not just be a smart Black, a Black person? Like, it doesn't have to be equated to being white. But someone said when Black students enroll in predominantly white schools, which I did in Clayton High School, so a lot of you all working in Johnston County will be able to correlate or understand this question. When they enroll into these white schools, they are systematically placed in lower level classes, automatically based solely on their race. How can this problem in access be resolved, especially for students needing reinforcements who don't come from an adverse background but possess the potential? Much of the testing process is racially biased.
So this specifically is a large part of our department, mine and Ashleigh's. Our coaches specifically work, they kind of have like half and half jobs, is to work with our kids that struggle to make sure that they are not over-identified in special education, but also to work with those that are gifted, and specifically targeting the kids that are underrepresented populations. So when you think about, for example, in high school, a lot of that gets at, right, we assume that certain kids need to be placed in lower level classes. They don't need to go into our honors and our AP. So part of it, and we talk with Amanda, right, working with our counselors, how do we place, like we know we need to consider how do we place our kids, and some of it's belief systems that we put on our kids, but it's really looking at, again, it goes to the tests that are created and that we use to identify kids. But in Johnston County, we are looking at how do we serve kids regardless of if they are identified as gifted or not. But if we see their potential that they are advanced, then they also get that same support. So even if they haven't passed the test and are identified as gifted, if, like, we have created the system and structure that if they have that potential as advanced, then they also get to be in the honors and AP, et cetera. They get to get that same support and same service because we recognize that not everyone is going to pass and get that same but gifted title. We also, around database problem solving, for the kids that struggle, we're doing the same thing for those that are gifted, because when it gets to our office and we have 2 pieces of paper, and for the white kid that got identified And let's say their scores were lower, and for our Black and brown kid that had higher scores and they did not get identified, we then go back to the schools and we have the conversation, hey, let's talk about this. Why did this kid get identified and this kid did not? And so we have those difficult conversations, but we, getting at those beliefs. All right, if we took these names off, talk to us about how these decisions were made. And so, A, it's the difficult conversations, but B, it's also, even without the label, if the kid shows that they have that potential, we're going to serve them.
And to piggyback off that, it's really about the leadership in the school. It's really about how your principal, your administration team views that school aspect and what's important to them. Being able to identify those problems, talk about the hard problems, bringing that data that we talked about up to discussion, even though it may be uncomfortable. I had a particular situation where I'm in a predominantly white school. There's about 115 staff. It's probably about 7 African Americans now. And when I was a teacher there, it was 3. And that was probably like 4 years ago. We have those situations where the problem that we had was that we were identifying kids to graduate early in the 22 credit recovery program. And I had a football player at the time who had a 3.3 GPA. He was actually getting some college looks, some college offers. But at the time, he got sold the opportunity to graduate early. And so if you tell a teenager, hey, you can get out of here in a year earlier, that teenager's probably going to take that opportunity. And what bothered me is, like, I understand the process of the 22 credit is there to help children get to the point to graduate where they need. But it came to a point where I felt like back in the day that we were just funneling kids through this opportunity for the graduation rate. And so, all those kids, they don't need to be identified within that 22 credit recovery program. Some of those kids could have stayed and graduated, and took foreign languages and being able to go to college. But now, since they put themselves in this program, they're going to have to go back and get another degree from the community college first before they even go to college and do all these extra things that they could have just stayed the extra year and do. And so it's like, at my school, we house 1,200 kids, 775 white, 305 Hispanic, and 180 African American. And so the problem with that is, we graduate 96% of our African American kids. We graduate 96% of our white kids, our minority kids. Only 20% of our minority kids graduate, leaving, go to a 4-year school, a trade, a 2-year, or military, while our white counterparts are 79 to 80% graduating, going to a 4-year school, 2-year trade, or military. So out of 485, only 21%, that's 18 African American and 3 Hispanic. So that means only 20 to 25 African American kids go to post-secondary education opportunities. 3 to 5 Hispanic kids out of 306 go somewhere, while almost 80% of our white counterparts. And so those are like the deep data dials that we talked about earlier. Like, okay, 96% of kids are graduating. That's good. But what is the problem with that 96%? What's the story tell? What is the why behind the 96%? And so those are some of the things that I'm attacking in my school, just trying to get everyone on the same page, get an even playing field for all students. And the crazy part is, we talk about systemically, it's been so long with race and education that where I'm at, in such a small town, a lot of my minority kids, that the need to work is right now. So they're not thinking about future and past transitions, because they have immediate needs right now. And so with those immediate needs right now, I can say that, we probably took advantage of some of those opportunities. Like, hey, well, this kid needs to do this. We need to get him out so he can be X, Y, and Z, be great. But we need to actually have those harder conversations. Like, hey, man, you just need to stay one more year. Let's assess you. Let us get this opportunity, to get you better and make you a status to get you out in the world. And so this year, I will say that we did an amazing job of actually, and it doesn't sound good, but if we need to hold students back to get them forward, then that's what needs to happen. So our graduation rate dipped a little bit, but I honestly think it's for a better purpose, because we're not just pushing kids out no more. We're actually saying, hey, we want to work with you. We need you here. You need to learn this before you go out into the world. And so, like I said, it takes leadership to actually stand up and say, this is not right. This doesn't look right. Sorry, I went on a tangent. But.
Can I jump in there?
Please.
Thank you, Dominique, because you talked about the importance of having these crucial conversations with kids, right, and students. It's also about having these critical, uncomfortable, hard conversations with educators too. And it's getting in team meetings and looking at data, and not just data, but we're having even observational conversations about how kids are performing in classrooms. It's how we structure the conversations and what we will tolerate and what we will not in a conversation. And so when we allow teachers to go directly to excuses, what's going on in the home, what's going on in the background, and then we allow that to water down a student's access to high quality, challenging curriculum, that's not okay. So we've got to change the structure of the conversation so that teachers start focusing on, okay, let's look at the instruction first before we start talking about the kid. Are we doing what we need to do? Are we providing what we need to provide? And so I think it's having non-negotiables for the conversations that we're having as educators, and leaders being willing to stand up and have and lead those tough conversations. Because for so long, we've allowed teachers to make excuses for kids who are underperforming, and then the next step in the strategy being not to provide a high-quality, challenging curriculum. And that's not okay.
I think I want to add to that, like, everything that you're saying is right. We cannot allow teachers to lower the bar, because that is racism in itself, right? Kids need modifications, but that bar should never be lowered. We keep the bar high and we find out what it takes to get that kid to the bar, but we can never lower the bar, right? And so I think that's a lot of the conversations that schools actually need to have as well, right? It is important to understand a child's home situation, because children learn by relationships, right? But you can be an amazing teacher, but if you don't have a relationship with that scholar, they are not going to thrive as much as they possibly can. And so it's okay for teachers to understand what's going on in a home situation, but giving those excuses, it's the bigotry of low expectations, right? We cannot lower our expectations and expect that students will thrive and survive. And so I definitely appreciate you, Mr. Manson, with thinking about what scholars actually need and being able to make those tough decisions to hold them back, because that's actually what they need. And the only way you're able to do that is not only by data, but actually having a relationship with students and knowing what they actually need based on their home life, based on socioeconomic status, like all of those things. And I'd also push you to also think about how your school can support students who have the real need, especially in our community, like have the real need to work, but how else are we pushing them and holding the bar high for them so that they can move on to having what society at this point deems as like a quality education post-secondary.
Okay, so a lot of the conversation that's being had right now is like very, vital. People are talking about the promoting like different aspects, acknowledging race and, biasness that's implemented on children and how it can happen, and having uncomfortable conversations. This sounds way too good to be true, because if everybody is carrying themselves like this and acknowledging all of this, then why is there such a problem? So what is actually being done, not like within your head of like what you believe should be done, like what conversations are you actually having? Are teachers able to talk to administration, say, hey, we can't do this like this, and are allowing a teacher to act on their own, recourse with the student? Or is there, a structure where administration is like, nah, you still got to follow the rules? Like, what's the upbreak between the morals that I'm witnessing right now versus what's actually happening in the classroom?
I can speak to this. Like, I have acquired PTSD from working in the charter school system. Like, I'm diagnosed with PTSD. There's a feeling that my other teacher friends feel. There's an increase in mental health struggles. Like, I feel like there's this quiet silence around what it means for teachers to be within and against this system when you know what's right for kids, but can't do it. It's like you are trying to run from slavery, but they cut your foot off. You can't even run if you wanted to. And so I felt the pressures of having to deliver a curriculum that I knew wouldn't work, that my paycheck was tied to. Teachers and admin would come in and evaluate me to see that I was on this day, on this lesson, saying this word, this skill at this time. And if not, what would happen? At the same time, right, this policing of bodies happening. I taught 11th and 12th graders who could not use the bathroom. That was not allowed. Kids could not go to the bathroom during the class day. They had to wait and use it only within the 3 minutes. So at the same time that Darnell was shaking in AP literacy class, AP literature, to go to the bathroom, right? I'm calling, hey, can you escort him? No, he can wait another 25 minutes. And then there's all the trauma that my kids are already enduring from outside of school. I've lost way too many kids to death. Like, I don't have any kids. My teacher friends in the past couple of months with COVID have literally lost 4 to 5 kids from gun violence in Philadelphia, right? So there's still all these other systems that are working Maryland Frye's birdcage metaphor, right, together. And I think the institution of school is one of those wires that make it harder for our children and our birds and teachers to actually thrive. So there's all this research around the second classroom, the third classroom, how to, work with, around people and through people. So I think the real struggle, especially in cases and spaces where you're the only, right? I was the only Black teacher in all of middle school for the past 2 years. I'm othered. So when I speak up, it's like, that's not happening. Or they try to silence me. Right? It's like, I don't even have a seat at the table. And if I say something, I'm crazy for even, like, it's not real, right? They can't see it. They can only see mostly this explicit, dangerous KKK version of white supremacy and don't see it how it comes up when they ask kids to line up in boy and girl lines, right? Or the messages that are very harmful and cause racial stress and literal mental health issues. Like, it sounds funny, but I don't take mental health lightly. And I have been, affected by it in a big way. So I think that's part of what's stopping it. And then no one stays in long enough to make a change, right? It's turnover, crazy, turnover. So it's hard to keep a foundation of folks there to do that long-term work.
And that's a great point that you made, because teachers, there are teachers who care about our kids, and there are teachers who actually go above and beyond what they're supposed to do. I mean, there are teachers who take students home, feed students, give them clothes. I've seen instances where teachers go so far and beyond for some of their own students than they did their own kids. So we won't say it's all teachers. But you make a great point about being the other, being the only one in the classroom, being the only one in the school. Those things does happen. And to figure out, you said, like, when you say something, it's kind of like, well, that's not for the masses. So that's not being identified, because no, everyone's not having the same problem, only you, because you're the different one in the room, right? And so I can have my own experiences where I was working in Greensboro, so everything was pro-Black. We wanted to fix the Black and brown children. The school I taught at was 98% free and reduced lunch. When I got to Johnston County, and being the only one in the room, when I made some of the comments and remarks about helping certain students, it was like, who's this guy? What is he talking about? But we haven't seen those issues. Like, no one's ever brought those issues up. And so combating certain issues and trying to have those crucial conversations, like we said, aren't always the easiest thing to do. But as we, and hearing you have PTSD is real. There's such difference between, like, a state-supported school and a charter school. And I know Mr. Chris will be able to talk a lot about charter schools as well. But I would say in charter schools, some charter schools are loose. And I feel like the one you worked at was very ran tight ship, right? And so within public schools, I will say a lot of times it's so much going on and so bigger that sometimes we're a little bit more lax and we don't able to hold teachers accountable as much as you were being able to held accountable in a smaller setting at your school. Which is something that we talked about in the last segment, that as administrator, I want to do better at doing that. I want to be better at having those crucial conversations, because as a teacher, I felt like you. They called me in when it was the hard conversations with one of those tough kids that need to be reached to, or one of those tough parents. When there was other situations that the kid wasn't my color, my representation, it was like, oh, we don't need Manson, or he's okay. Well, we can talk to another kind. But if it was that angry Black parent, or if it was that loud Black kid, we need Manson here right now. And I'm like, well, why am I only good enough to handle certain situations and not all situations? And I think that the camera that broke the straw that broke the camera back for me was my last year. I had a situation where a student stole a cell phone. I got that cell phone back within 3 to 5 minutes. He still got suspended. I understand. situation where a student, a white student, sexually harassed another student, grabbed her, fondled her and grabbed her, and he had got lunch detention. So I was outraged. My mom was like, how is this possible? How's this possible? It's a situation where we had a kid who was a known farmer kid, known big in ag, had a pocket knife with him. Well, pocket knives are you're not supposed to have in school. We know him. He's fine. Just take the pocket knife, put it in your car. We had another black student had a pocket knife. Now he has a pocket knife because he doesn't feel safe walking home from the bus. But when he got caught, his pocket knife was long-term suspension. And so my mind was like, it's not right. Something has to change. And that was one of the core reasons why I stepped into administration, because I always wanted to coach. I never wanted to have a dream of being an administrator. I wanted to be a coach. That's all I wanted. I wanted to reach children how I was reached. But when I was just kind of looking at the coaching tool in Johnson County, out of 8 to 10 high schools, there was only 2 black head coaches. Each school has 10 varsity sports. And so I knew I wasn't going to be able to make a difference coaching football. And once I was coaching football, all my students who graduated were getting locked up or getting killed, as we talked about earlier. And it's like I'm reaching these kids, but am I really reaching them? Am I helping them? Am I just telling them good things they want to hear? Or am I like actually in their classroom figuring out what they're doing, how they're doing, what they're learning, who's teaching them, and how they can get to the next point? Or am I just saying, hey, I need you to run 50 yards so we can get this win real quick? And so like my why wasn't matching up with my actions. Yes, I love kids. Yes, I wanted to play football, but I was still failing them because they were becoming nobody once they left. So the empowerment that you talked about, Ms. Rosser, like I definitely understand that. That was the reason why I went into administration, because I got tired of being told what I could help with, what I couldn't help with, when's the right time, when's not the right time, what children deserves, certain high expectations, what children don't, and I get tired of teachers making excuses for kids who don't have, because I'm a first generation college student, single parent household. Dad was a drug dealer. Me and my brother pretty much raised my brother my whole time. My mom worked 2-3 jobs. Like, it can be done. But if I feel extra sympathy for you and don't give you this work or don't help you, once you leave me, I did nothing for you but feel sorry for you. And you just kind of skated on the next way. And so it's like Mr. Christopher said, holding children to high expectations, believing in them, telling them they can do things, they can achieve it, challenging them versus coddling them is the only way that, we're going to be able to beat some of these problems in these areas that we have right now with our students, especially our black and brown stereotypes.
I think there's something to be said about like the dynamics of the different schools, right? I think a lot of what happens is like we don't have a seat at the table. And because we don't have a seat at the table, we are not allowed, or we don't have a voice to be able to make these very, very, very needed changes, right? And so I've been in schools where there is a strict discipline policy that is problematic in itself. And then I've also been in schools where there's no discipline policy, and that's also chaotic, right? And so how do we find the common ground, and how do we also serve students like that are black and brown, right? We know that their educational experience is different from a white student, right? What they need is different. And so like counties and schools and districts need to really look at who's at the table, and also principals, and I will charge like administrators in their hiring practices need to be very intentional about who they are bringing on board. Are they anti-racist? It's not just enough to be an ally. Are you anti-racist? Are you a co-conspirator? How are you going to change the educational outcomes for our students that look like you and that don't look like you, right? And so we'll never say that there's going to be a school of all black teachers that do like amazing work, which there probably is somewhere, and I would love to be a part of that. But like, we want to make sure that like the kids that are sitting in front of us actually have people that actually care. And we also need to look at these policies. Like, it makes no sense why a kid can't go to the restroom during an AP lit. You're in an AP class, what the heck? Like, why can't you go to the restroom, right? Why are we lining kids up in the hallways, right? Sometimes I see the need for lining students up in the hallways because it may be a flow of traffic issue, it may be a safety issue, but dividing them by gender, having them constantly walking in silent hallways, you're conditioning them for prison, right? And so like we really need to take a look at those those practices that we have in those schools, that's the first thing. Look at the practices that are problematic, have voices like Ms. Rosser, Mr. Manson, like talk about like their experience, what they're experiencing in the classroom, so that we can make those changes. And then we really just need to hire better. Like, we have to hire better. Getting a paycheck for being a teacher is like not enough anymore. We have to really hire for like strong teachers who are going to dismantle the system.
I think that's funny that you brought up prison, because as I was listening to the description of you being in the students not being able to go to the bathroom for a certain amount of hours because you had to get a police escort, I'm like, okay, Dominique Goodmond was in prison. There are rooms that I couldn't leave unless I had an escort. I couldn't go to the bathroom at certain points unless I had someone watching me. If someone came to visit me in prison, I couldn't go pee unless somebody went with me, you know? Anytime we would go to the like cafeteria or anywhere that we had to like travel, we were forced to walk in a single file line, one behind each other. And there's something mentally that breaks down in you when you have someone enforcing that upon your actions. The power from yourself is like removed because you know you have to follow these guidelines. And so you all are saying how all of this is being implemented, but to have such a similar, comparison to a prison, how do you guys start to break that down? Because everybody's familiar with like the school to prison pipeline and how it just like that flows. Like you guys are talking about, how you can acknowledge the ways that students are treated differently, how the disciplinary actions aren't equal, but how does that begin to change so people aren't systematically like beginning to be comfortable with this? Because that makes me like understand if kids are coming out, why some people in prison are used to the treatment that they're getting. I wasn't personally, but like some people are just like, they're in there chilling, like this is normal. How does that change so we can like decrease the stats of this school to prison pipeline?
So, whether this is the right thing, Amanda, I'll say, this is the right thing to say or not is the truth. And to be honest, these conversations are new. Really digging into our biases, our beliefs, our values. We've never considered as white educators how our daily manifestations are a result of our lived experiences and our backgrounds and our biases. And we've never been required to dig into that. That is new. That is just starting to happen. And to be honest with you, when you're part of a system where all of this has started over the past month with George Floyd, and various school systems are starting to take a stance on their feelings behind this and their support of Black students, that has varied even from districts right next to each other, right? And there are some districts who have come with a stance that also came with policy for the educators within that system. This is how you can communicate during this conversation. So it's not just this is our stance, but this is also how you will communicate as you support within this. And really putting shackles on us in a sense as we show our support and engage in this conversation. And that's difficult. How do you dig into the readiness level of people within a system? It's hard enough to dig in individuals' belief systems, the impact, how they educate on a daily basis, but how do you do that system-wide? And I don't know the answer, but I know it's something that we've got to do. So to answer your earlier question as to all of this sounds great, but why aren't we seeing impact yet? Because it's new. We haven't been doing it long enough. This isn't accepted. It's not okay.
Okay, Ashley, what I will say right now, and I want everybody to dive in on what she's saying about the policy that's, preventing her from answering certain things in a particular fashion. But what I will say first is this is not new. I released a story, Clayton High School. For those that attended, there was a day where this became an issue, and the Confederate flag was banned from the school due to like the racist tensions that it was creating in the environment. And so you had, people like voicing out of it. It was banned. Every white person at that school rioted the next day. They all wore their Confederate flags. We had News and Observer. We had the whole situation. I had just moved to North Carolina. I've been out the country literally all my life. So I didn't really know what I was standing in the middle of. with like the race. I didn't really understand Clayton at that time. However, people were yelling racism at that time. People were yelling injustice at that time. This is probably back, 2002, 2003. However, this isn't a new conversation. You guys, like, the white community is just now starting to listen to it.
Yes, that's what I mean. So people's willingness to actually start engaging in this dialogue because they're seeing the impact over time. The issue is not new, and it being in our face is not new, but people finally being willing to sit down and have the conversations about it and getting brave enough to have the conversations about it when systems are saying you can only say X, Y, and Z, that's new.
So for the rest of the panelists, what are you guys doing do you all have a system that tells you that you can only say red on Monday and blue on Tuesdays? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I've had some PD people ask me to do PD and tell me don't say the word white. Can you do this session, but make sure you don't say black people? Like, what do you think I'm about to talk about here in this next hour? And so Hawaii Parks, my student told me, school in 11th grade, schools where you learn how to be silent. And, you know, I think one way we can start to chip away at this is to let the parents know what's happening. So much illegal, crazy shit happens in schools that parents have no clue about. Like cohorting, moving kids' classes, bubble kids, and who needs to go with what teacher, and totally not even alerting parents at all. I think when I worked in a predominantly white school, parents have this sense of entitlement, elite, like to even tell me what I'm gonna teach, how I'm gonna grade, let me see the rubric, right? And I think there's this like assumption, like there's a control over it. And I think that for a lot of our Black and brown communities, parents feel like, you know, school got it. Like, I can trust the school. No, you cannot. Like, ask questions. Like, I think schools and administrators need to do a better job of having parents and community in on these conversations because they're also tied to systems that are affecting school in a big way. And so if we stop working for folks and work with them, then maybe some of this would change and there'll be more accountability on different levels. But a lot of my friends that are parents have no clue what's going on with their kids in schools, and it's horrible.
That is true. And a lot of these policies don't change. And a lot of times, you know, you get new superintendents to come in and there's so many things to work on at one time. It's like, you know, some certain things fall through the crack. A specific policy we talked about, we didn't talk about it, I'll talk about is when I was working in a high school in a different county, if you were 16 and you got in a fight, you automatically got locked up and went to jail. And so it's like, you know, we're giving kids records for fighting, for having a 2-minute scuffle or a 2-minute conversation or brawl. And it's like, I just gave this kid a record for having a 30-second brawl fight. And if I got locked up for every fight I had growing up as a teenager, I would not be here today. And it's like, we're giving children records for a 30-second dispute. And it's like, you know, and it made me feel so, I'm looking at these children, babies getting handcuffed and walked away. And I'm calling parents like, hey, you know, you got to pick your student up or your child down from downtown X, Y, and Z. And it's like, and parents are like, for what? And, you know, that was killer. I'm choking up now. That was one of the hardest things I had to do. So I'm like, I had to talk to my principal, like, you know, is this set in stone? Is this something that we have to do? Like, can we talk to the superintendent to see if, like, this policy is set in stone to where it's like every school is doing this? Is this a situation where it's, you know, we got autonomy to, you know, suspend or send to jail? Like, you know, what is the law behind this? You know, what is our district policy? And so, you know, when we talk to our superintendent, she's like, you know, no, that don't make sense. You know, that's an old rule. You know what I mean? Like, not necessarily saying that she skipped it on purpose or looked over it, but you know, we don't have to call the police when there's a fight. You know, if y'all can handle that, then handle it. So there's a lot of like old laws in certain states that just never been addressed, like where Mississippi is illegal for a white person to marry a black person or interracial dating. Like, now that happens, yeah, but you know, until those things are being enforced, it's still there. So it's like a lot of times, and you know, our policy and our laws really come from DC, and then the districts really make up, you know, what they can do in the county. And we had the opportunity to go to an AEI Institute, which is an American Enterprise Institute, and it's a reform for public policy. It's a think tank to defend like dignity, humanity, expanding human potential, and like building a freer and safer world. But the problem is with these people who make these laws, are these up and coming 25, 26-year-olds who are trying to make a name for themselves, who's never been in the classroom and never taught, and they're figuring out these laws, whatever the best way, these policies, to help tax breaks and make money, X, Y, and Z, to get their name out there. But no one's ever thinking about the students. And so we had a 3-day retreat in DC with the AEI Institute, challenging these policies, these lawmakers. Why is this law? What are we doing here? How are you guys coming up with these laws? Are any of you guys who are making laws? Are you guys in the classrooms? Are you former educators? Are you former administrators? None of them are. And so we literally have people just making laws and policies that's never been in the classroom.
Well, how do you get the people that have been in the classroom to the table for making policies? I completely agree with that mindset. That's why a lot of times I work now, because there's a lot of people making laws for, my fight with, felons, like individuals that have been previously incarcerated. The people that are sitting at the table making policies have never touched a prison or a jail. Like, you don't have a record. So you don't really know the true impact on our lives or what you're actually deciding upon right now. So I'm gonna need to pull myself up to the table so we can talk together. How are you guys pulling yourself up to this table to kind of like pan these issues out?
Well, like I said, we were able to go up there and talk to them about and challenge their policies and laws and why they do those certain type of things. I'm going to say in every district, they have certain control over what policies they can make, but all those bigger policies come from, DC and the state. So it's a good question.
Okay, so Mr. Christopher, you are in that area, the Maryland area. Like, how?
Yes.
Where does that, like, are you familiar with where these policies are being created, or do they get placed in your school system?
They do. So to answer your previous question, I'm founding a school for public policy, right? And so like our hope is 6 through 12, students are able to advocate for themselves and learn advocacy and policy making, so that they are able to exact change within society and Congress, lawmakers, what have you. And so like that is our main focus. I think there are, to Mr. Manson's point, there are tons of policies that are introduced that go unnoticed because they're pushed by a specific agenda, and there's not enough knowledge within the community to be able to one, know what these proposed changes or these proposed policies are, and two, something that's really important is like, how do we make sure that we are electing officials of color that have the best interests of our students and our communities at hand? And so those are two things that are really happening. There are a couple of organizations that are like really, really great that are bringing light to a lot of these problematic policies, but the progress is slow, right? And so like we still have to continue pushing. And so I'm getting in on the groundwork, like with students, so that like by the time they leave our doors in 12th grade, they know exactly how to go ahead and affect change. But it's a slow process, and it comes down to the access and the education that everyone in the community has around like these policies and what's taking place in Congress.
Okay. Go ahead, Amanda.
So when you were talking about, how do you get the right people to the table that need to be at the table for policies, I started to think about some of the organizations that we have for like representing different professions. Like when I was a school counselor, the North Carolina School Counselor Association, like they have somebody who is constantly working on policies and things. And they actually have a day where you get to sign up and you can go and actually talk to the people putting these policies in place at the state level. And I'm sure there's something similar for like the North Carolina or NCAE, the teacher organization. But I think that something that Dominique Manson talked about way back, we've got to start with the adults in the building in terms of training and really getting their minds right first, because those are the holders of power within our school buildings, if we're talking about, a system and a systemic approach. So we've got to get the minds right of our school administrators. And if they're supportive, like the sky is the limit, because anytime I've ever felt stifled and my voice has felt like I couldn't speak was when I was in a school building and I didn't feel like I would have full support with the words coming out of my mouth. And I didn't want to put my job on the line at that point in time in my life. So in Johnston County, you've also talked about, what realistically are we doing? Because we've talked about the things we'd love to do. And we are trying to jump on what's happened in society. I don't I don't like what's happened to George Floyd, but the movement itself has got a lot of power behind it that we're trying to get behind as well with the equity department. And we have been building an equity module that we're hoping to get approval to be a requirement for the district, because if you can't have that as a requirement now, like when would it ever be a requirement? Like in the state that we are currently in as a nation, and just seeing the need so loud and clear, even though the need has always been here. So just working on these adults, and most importantly, our highest level of leadership first, because the work has got to be continuous, and we cannot continue to say, oh, they're almost retired. You know them. They're just, give these old excuses for these old educators that have these mentalities that are continuing to just weigh down our kids.
And to piggyback on that, I would say, if I can, Dom, that when you say like having a voice at the table, like while we do have an equity department, we haven't always had an equity department. And so this is my third year back in Johnston, and I've been a part of the equity committee the whole time. And so, I was, like I said, I was in Wake before and on the equity committee there. And yes, they also, now too have an equity department. And so they, being in, as Ashleigh said before, you have districts side by side, and being a part of the equity work in both, looks very different and the impact very different. Also been doing it, for a different amount of time, but learned a lot in both. But what I'll say is having the opportunity to be a part of that work. So forcing yourself to have a seat at the table, like if this is something that you want to be a part of, like asking and continuing to push to if you have to squeeze a seat at the table to be a part of that work. But in Johnston, I would say that even though an equity department has been created, it's still allowing, and they see the need for voices from all departments. So yes, there's equity, but they still want voices from people at schools, people in academics and facilities. And there's people from across all departments in the district and at school level, at district level, people that are different races and religions, and recognizing that we really need all voices on that committee. And so I think that that's very beneficial in the work that we are doing. I think we know on this call, like you said, Dom, like this is not new. This fight is not new. And we have got to start seeing impact. So it's, all the stuff with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, like this is what has taken, all of a sudden, it's, for whatever reason, it's in everyone's face. And I think it was last week, maybe on last week's call, was it because of, COVID, so everybody's in quarantine, that everybody had time to see it. Everybody had time to digest it. I don't know, but it's now time that people are, all right, now I'll engage in dialogue. Now I have time and a heart to now have this two-way conversation. But it's allowed an opportunity for school systems to say what stance they're taking and what action they're taking.
Okay, so I'm gonna change the direction just a little bit, because, and I'm gonna speak for myself, and I know that there's a large percentage of African Americans that follow under me, but some don't want to say it. A lot of times, like I said earlier, we were promoting like we need to educate ourselves, but there was a large amount of people in America that didn't understand the impact of Donald Trump choosing Tulsa, Oklahoma on June 19th to host his rally, and that speaks volumes if you understand what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That speaks volumes if you know that Juneteenth represents the emancipation of slavery in America. However, there are still people in America that don't know either. They don't know, there's some younger Black kids that don't know what Juneteenth is. There's a lot of white America that doesn't know what Juneteenth is. There's Black and white individuals that don't know what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so, it becomes a situation where there's a lot of things that have happened in America where you're having to educate yourself. A lot of us, we're having to educate ourselves on certain things that have happened to other people outside of Rosa Parks and Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, that's taught in the school system. How do you guys begin to implement structure to where you're educating Black Americans the actual history of their culture, so they don't have to wait until they're 22, 25, 36 to become woke about the reality of the world?
So I would definitely jump in on that. So as I talked to you earlier about some of my problems of practice in my school, the biggest way that I felt like being able to help the minority gap accelerate as far as having post-secondary education plans is pretty much just celebrating them, letting them identify who they are. If I'm not the masses and my culture is not being expounded upon in the school, and if I see nothing in the school that looks like me or bring any kind of awareness to who I am, I'm not going to be keen to try to accelerate or be who I can be here. And so I was actually privy to throw the school's first Black History Month program. It's 2020. But we had an amazing time. We had a week worth of celebrations. We had like a trap and paint, which you kids came and they had like African figures, whatever, and we painted them out. And our principal was very good. He gave us money to get pencils and paint. They able to choose their own music along. It was clean. We had I Have a Dream speech day where kids, I had the AP art class make a mural of Martin Luther King. All the kids came down, wrote in their dreams, their aspirations, their goals, what they want to do. We hung that banner up over in front of the school for about 2-3 weeks. We had an African American quiz bowl. And so seeing those guys like learn about the history and learning more than, Martin Luther King Street or Malcolm X was violent and Martin Luther King was nonviolent. That's all we know. And so when I was able to challenge some of these kids and like let them know who was Lewis Lattimore or, where's the term the monkey wrench came from, who actually made the wrench, like showing them that, African Americans have built this country and a lot of the things that they use now, they think wasn't invented by Black people, but it was. And so just kind of empowering them. We had a Spanish Heritage Month. So we celebrated them. We would get the gym out. We had a whole bunch of Spanish music, kids dressed up. And so, these are the first type of things that are happening at my school. My school's been here since 1969. And so, to actually be able to put African-American, a Black History Month program in place was amazing. Now, was the buy-in great? Well, the buy-in was great for all of the students. Well, for the students who wanted to come. But, a lot of times the teachers who always are helping those students showed up. I wanted to see if a lot of my teachers would show up. And unfortunately, I only had the same teachers who always are helping those same minority students show up. But it's a start. And I'm not going to hold anyone accountable. I don't know what they had to do during that time. So I'm not going to say, hey, they just didn't show up. But I know that the ones who always want to help showed up. To show them they support them and show they support their heritage and their culture. Because the main problem is when someone says, I don't see color, then you don't see me. Like I'm right here. I don't know how you don't see color, because if you don't see color, you don't respect my heritage. You don't respect my religion. You don't respect anything, my culture. You don't respect anything about me because you just told me you don't see me. I'm not transparent. I'm right here. And so, when you have situations where people say, like, I don't see color, like 9 times out of 10, which I will say from people who I talk to in power, they're at a crossroad, because if they speak up, then they may end up losing their power and their respect from the people around them. But if they don't say anything, then their guilt kills them at the same time. And so right now, I was at a point where I was like, am I going to take this job and not speak up and not advocate for what's going on? Or am I going to play the good boy role and stay quiet and stay still and make sure I can move up the ladder? And that's something that, as a Black educator, as a Black leader in the South, like that's something we have to think about and deal with.
I want to hop in and answer, talk more specifically about your question, Dominique. History has been taught white. It's been whitewashed. And we've been removed from history books. And so that's why we don't know. If you look at, and I'm in a unique position right now because I am developing my school, right? Doing my school development plans, selecting curriculum. If you look at curriculums, especially for social studies and history, they're not good. 2, there aren't many out there that are diverse. 3, they're super whitewashed. They speak nothing about our history, our heritage, our culture, nothing. And so the issue is the way we were taught history and the way we were taught the history of this country and what we were taught about ourselves. I saw a panel or a participant say something about they didn't learn anything after World War II. That means that you literally skipped an entire, very important part of American history, right? And so schools and systems, and I will also call out curriculum developers and writers, need to go back, revisit the history of America, revisit everything that has taken place to Black and brown folks in this country, and write that into the damn curriculum. I'm very fortunate to have someone actually developing our own curriculum for history the way it actually should be taught. And part of that work, and it's a super dope, phenomenal white woman that's actually writing our curriculum, super amazing. It takes a lot of unlearning the BS that you've been taught and being taught the right way. And so like, that's the work that schools, curriculum developers, like everyone needs to go through in order for us to get that progressive change, because there's no reason why everyone in the country shouldn't know about Juneteenth, or there's no reason why we shouldn't know who these predominant figures are that come from Black and brown communities that are super important to the history and the way we operate today as a society. And so like, we have to go back and unlearn BS and learn it the right way and teach our babies the right way.
And did anyone else have statements to make about that?
Yeah, I think that, again, like back to the point of teachers or educators knowing how to use these resources, right? Once we have that curriculum in place, it's in my understanding that most people, it's taboo to talk about race, especially white folks. It's not a thing, like not talking about it. And so I think that there's like a need for white people and white educators to kind of let people of color like kind of who are deeply engaged in abolitionist and curriculum work to kind of take that space and do the work. To me, for years of a group to not talk about race, to like not have coaching or anything around it, to kind of be the experts now or be called to do this in an effective way, I think is like absurd, right? People are gonna need help and training. Like people can't even have regular conversations with their family about these ideas, let alone I have things fall apart in front of me and I'm trying to teach kids about Chinua Achebe and what the big message is here. Like a lot of teachers avoid it, right? I'm not talking about it. I don't know how to teach it. It makes me uncomfortable, or they like regulate how it's taught, right? We can't say the N-word, which words we can say, why we can say them, and imposing their own norms about how this should happen, how it makes them feel safe. And a lot of, like, it wasn't in my pedagogy at A&T to learn how to build brave spaces in my classroom. Like that was not a thing at all. Like, so a lot of the stuff that we're talking about is essentially not even taught to teachers, right? There's no conversation about this in a lot of the schooling that happens for educators in grad school and undergrad. So when you're faced with a classroom of 40 kids and 80 of them got IEPs and you have no push-in support and nobody's helping you and you're the only one in the school and you have these, like, it's like rocket science trying to figure out how am I going to make this happen in an effective way.
So
I'm sorry, go down.
Okay, no, I have a specific question right now. Just specifically for Dominique, Trevon, and B. We're all Aggies, Aggie pride. Anyway, we all attended HBCU, and there's not a lot of information that was pushed on us about our culture at the same token, unless that's the field that you dove into. So do you think like a form of like the white supremacy that came in from the education spawned off even to HBCUs, not making some of this information imperative on our culture? Because I'll be honest with you all, the first Juneteenth meal that I ate, like I'm commemorating Juneteenth, this is our emancipation, was in prison. I went to an HBCU. That's a whole problem. So how do you guys think that affected even the HBCU culture?
That's interesting. I didn't have that same experience. I didn't. But I know a lot of folks that went to HBCUs, not only just North Carolina A&T, but like went to other HBCUs that did not get their history. Like their history was not taught to them. I'm fortunately from an area, like I'm from Washington, D.C. I went to a Black county. I went to HBCU. And so I was fortunate to have my history taught to me the way it should have been, but I know that's not the experience of others. So I'll step back on this one.
I would say when I actually did attend North Carolina A&T, I started becoming more aware of Black excellence and Black power and some of the things, the marks that we did make, and on this earth. So I actually did, and I took an African American Studies class too, just because I wanted to be a little bit more knowledgeable about what was going on about myself and my culture. Because growing up in Wake County, like I went to all Black schools until I went to high school, which was Broughton, and predominantly white school, and then I all I really care about was football. But then when I got to A&T, I just seen so many people like me doing amazing things I've never saw before. I've never seen what that's one thing I credit A&T. I've never been to a place where I just saw Black people excelling, and that's what stuck with me the most. So I actually didn't have that issue because I actually did take a couple of classes because I wanted to know more. So I can't do that as much.
And I think I learned a lot of history. I'm from New York, so when I got to A&T, like I was a type A student, and I was shocked that I didn't know stuff that my peers learned in the South. I felt so slighted. Like, what was New York doing? I'm supposed to be the smartest in the room right now, and I don't know what's going on. But I also feel like A&T did not, there still weren't these conversations at A&T, right? I feel like it was very theory. It was all about the test, how to be a teacher. I don't remember any class at all that made me reflect on who I was as a person and how that would inform me as a teacher. Like, it wasn't happening. I'm so excited to think about like what's happening now. I feel like it's very traditional in the sense it wasn't hardly any of this that I can even remember. It's very pedagogical, very in the technical place of it all. And that's why I think a lot of programs are like this. There's no conversation about what it means to be me in my socialization in the world and how I'm showing up in my classroom or school.
And so let me just give myself like a disclaimer on my comments. So yes, granted, no, I have never celebrated Juneteenth until prison. No, I do not feel like the history was deeply embedded in me in A&T, but I didn't choose to take those classes as well. However, that is the first time that I was able to witness Black excellence and just to witness how great Blacks are in America. But I'm also a military brat. I was never immersed into that culture my entire life. So some of the education that you all received, especially you, Trevon, in Maryland, I never got that. I was on the Dodds system. So whatever Dodds was teaching, that's what I was learning. But, we've been speaking about just like the different realms of things under the education umbrella, exactly, what is happening, tomorrow. What are you working on to, help cultivate the system that like however the school system is set up back again in the fall and people start coming back to school, what practices are you trying to implement to where you can start having these conversations? You don't have to talk to kids without saying the word Black or white. Things of that nature. You are able to express yourself at the table without feeling like the outcast. Like, what are some of the things that you're doing? Who are some of the people you're trying to talk to? Like, what's the action plan, like, outside of the conversation?
So I can speak for myself. We are doing, I know next year we're going to be trying to get an equity board on our school and talk to my principal about that. We also, I'm also going to be leading the equity training myself for our school next year. We need some more restorative practices. We need social emotional learning for our kids. Like, we have to attack the adults first before we start coming at the kids. Like, students, they just don't know what they don't know. And of course, adults, they know better. So it's like, I'm not going to drill a kid about something I know he's not going to understand at this point in his life right now because he's not mature enough. But I know that this teacher, who is very well mature, we got to attack their mindset so that way they can help this kid's mindset. We got to attack these traditional mindsets within our school system. We can help our kids. So like I said, personally, equity training, we're going to have some social emotional learning, pushing for restorative practices. Those are things we're trying to get in our school right now to help us bridge that gap between our students and our teachers.
Dominique, I feel like you and I need to be in communication for next year just to help each other out. So I talked about those modules that we're developing right now, but like as of tonight, so I also mentioned I teach for state, and I mean, I'm not trying to blast our business out to the world, but like I'm in a department where social justice is like one of our number one objectives. And some things have come to light where microaggressions did not go addressed how they needed to be addressed in the classroom. So we're checking ourselves. We're having these hard conversations. And so I just got done teaching summer 1, summer 2 starts tonight. So like last night, hours scouring through articles and whatnot on microaggressions, intersectionality, all these things. And like my teaching style, for it to work, like I've got to present this tonight. Like, let's talk about this because you're going to need to know that when I call you out, it's going to be from a place of love and not from a place of like, I want to shut you down. because we got to keep these conversations going. So I share all that because if I were in a school building prepping for my own staff next year, I would probably be taking those really awesome articles that I found and giving them to my staff and saying, all right, let's talk about this. You know, is this the first time you're hearing these words? Let's just get comfortable with the uncomfortable, so to speak, and then, you know, trickling down to the kids from there.
So jumping on with Amanda, she said I'm a part of building that module as well, the 5-part module around equity. But even before that, you know, this work is not like you don't arrive at a destination, it's a journey. So continuing to build my knowledge, so diving into books and resources and dialogue, conversations with people, just so I can continue to learn. So just always learning. And then building that module to build capacity of the people that I work with, that we work with in the school system, continuing to collaborate with folks in other school systems to see how, like, just to learn from one another. And then I always wear the lens of a mother, right? So I'm already thinking about, as however we go back to school in the fall, to have conversations with her school, her teacher, her principal, to know, because like you say, I mean, I shouldn't be the only one talking to my daughter about race, you know, and her, you know, she's biracial. So like, what are they doing to talk about race in the classroom? You know, especially her being a minority, like, how is she included? How do we talk about that? So wearing that lens of a mother, what are we doing? How do I engage in that conversation? Yes, as an educator in the school system, but also as a mother in the school system. What do those conversations look like?
I'm happy to be affiliated with lots of groups here in Philly. One of them that's doing great work is the Center for Black Educator Development. And one of the things that they're working on is Freedom School program. And Freedom School has a long history of trying to create more free spaces and flip the traditional school setting. And one of the models that I like, similar to I think what Trey mentioned, is like really teaching as kids in high school and in college who want to be teachers, like putting them on now to what the shit is really about, right? Like if I would have had somebody or a mentor to help me navigate the situations that I'm in now, right? We can produce and like work on the other end of creating students, future teachers who have a different mindset than this generation of teachers who are moving out. Also, like, shameless plug to Educators Web, which is my thing around educators within, against, and beyond. I didn't have the spaces that I need as a teacher to have, you know, workshopping ideas or support or how to craft or practice having difficult conversations. I practice with my friends, like what I could say, where I'm gonna feel the stress in my body and how to combat that. So I think more teachers need, especially across different networks, even within the state, like more support, like just more people to lean on and talk to. So that's what I hope to accomplish in that space as well.
And that's you hit the nail on the head. And I can attribute my crucial conversations to NC State through our MSA program, because we did a lot of things that made people uncomfortable. We challenged all kinds of mindsets and diversity. We even went to a slave plantation in Bricks and Whitaker to talk about white privilege. And so, as you talked about, like just having those tough conversations, the biggest thing is I think we need to have a crucial conversation on professional development as well, but also the follow-up behind professional development. It's like, we don't follow up. We'll give you the information. We'll say, boom, we spent all this money on it. Wow, there you go, have it, use it. But where's the follow-up? Where's the intentionality? Where's the leadership coming into the classroom and say, hey, you know, Ms. Rosser, like you did, hey, are you using that? You know, what tools are you using? A lot of times, especially in with state-supported schools, because, you know, it's so hard to find the right teachers, a lot of teachers aren't challenged. A lot of teachers aren't held accountable to what they're teaching. And so when you're telling me that, you know, they're looking at to make sure you're using the right words and the right chapter, and the right curriculum, and the right section, I'm like, okay, that's what we need to be doing with our professional development. I know I'm going to say we wasted time and money just giving this information out, and there's no follow-up behind it. There's no strategic planning behind it. You know, we're not holding teachers accountable about what we just paid for. We just, hey, this is what we did, we tried it. And so that's one of the things that my team is talking about, you know, being intentional and, you know, having some follow-up behind professional development, you know, just going in the classroom and not just a quick check, but actually looking and talking to the kids and seeing what's going on and see how they're learning. And if the things that we're spending our money on are actually worthwhile working, or we need to go to a different direction.
You got it, Ashleigh.
Oh, sorry, Trevon.
No, go ahead.
So one of the big things I was going to say, and we've already started having some conversation around this in our department, but in our department, we have beginning teacher support. We also have professional development that touches all schools and teachers, which is a wide variety of trainings that we offer. Someone mentioned earlier in the comments, oftentimes we have a training and then that's sort of the end of it. And we never get to, okay, what is modeling? What is building capacity? How do we get it to sustain? And so I think that's digging into people's beliefs and values. So a big thing for me is working with the PD department and working with the beginning teacher department. And how are we bringing this dialogue to the table? How are we starting to normalize these types of conversations over time so that they don't feel uncomfortable anymore? And our team is part of database problem solving in the school. How are we digging into database problem solving and asking ourselves questions about our biases, et cetera, and how they're impacting our instruction and our core and the impact they're having on our students? So I think it's building it into our norms, normalizing it, and being an advocate for those conversations every time I'm at the table, because that's what I have control over, and making sure that there's just ongoing dialogue, and that we're working with departments within our greater department to make sure that this dialogue is happening and integrated into their work as well.
For me, diversity, equity, and inclusion is like one of my jams. That's what I love. And so for our founding staff, we are reading a book, Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain by Zaretta Hammond. If you guys have not read that, or if you have, it's a phenomenal book. Shout out to Barrett. Yep, that's our jam. I think it's like highly encouraged that you should do that as just like a founding, like a step, like a basic step. Like read that book, really like dive into like what it means to teach and be culturally responsive. So that's one thing. I think routinizing professional development. So the point that Mr. Manson made, like we pay for all this professional development, but what happens to it? Like how are we measuring it? How are we serving teachers, staff, the community on what it means to be diverse, and like are these professional developments helpful? So like making sure we routinize that. And the third thing, also another shameless plug, is I am also associated with the National Association of Black Male Educators. And so we have done a 3-part series, where the third part will be this Wednesday, but we've brought together over 1,500 Black and white educators across the world, not just the country, to talk about race in schools, to talk about a lot of the trauma that has been caused by a lot of white educators to students of color. And so our third part is this week. This is going to be phenomenal. We have over 500 tickets sold. And I would suggest that you join that conversation, as well as we do professional developments and are open to doing professional developments across the country. And so if you would like for us to come in and talk about like diversity, equity, and inclusion work, like we are more than happy to do that. And so, yeah, those 3 things are like what I'm actively doing right now to make sure that we are like dismantling the system and creating schools, like I talked about earlier, that are equitable for all students that walk through our doors.
Okay, so I just want to thank you all for that. Like I said in the beginning, conversation is necessary for understanding. However, if they don't lead to, plan of actions of where we're going to change stepping forward, it's for nothing. All of the information, like if anyone has any questions on any specific information, you can just load it up in the chat right now. So those individuals can provide your emails, and or panelists, if you just want to put your email in the chat for people to have access or more direct questions for you. We have 2 minutes left, and there's one question left that is asked, and so I'll let people just, this is a final question that we'll just address. A very relevant point, curriculum writing must be accurate. Who's writing it? I don't even know who to address this question to.
People write it, real live people. And so I think that's also why it's important to have these conversations. When I was a curriculum writer, even the way we wrote the exemplar response or the answer that we wanted students to have was mediated with our identities, right? We were trying to come up with exemplars for fences. And then my white colleague was like characterizing Troy as this evil, horrible man, right? without looking at the oppression that came. Why is Troy showing up this way? So I think curriculum writers should not be working in a silo, definitely in conversation, but it's real live people who are putting their understanding and interpretations as accurate or meeting the standards of the Common Core.
Okay, awesome. I think it's very important for everyone definitely to check out Christopher's panels that they're putting together. I thought that there would be like a large space to be able to address so many things in the education system simply within 1 hour. Definitely not. There's so many levels to this. And so just for there to be a platform that's going to continue to break down, I think is highly necessary, especially with individuals that are working within the system. So definitely go to where do they need to go to get the information for your panel that you're hosting?
You guys can go to NABME Inc. on Instagram, and in our bio, you'll be able to find it. So it's NABMEINC, and I'll put it in the chat as well. NABME Inc. And you can sign up in the bio via Eventbrite.
Okay, thank you guys so much once again for joining this panel. It's been a pleasure speaking with all of you all, and I just hope, as driven as you are today, to implement change that lasts after the media falls off of this topic. So you guys have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Thank you.